What happens when you die? You've been told rebirth is optional in Buddhism. What the Buddha actually taught is stranger than either believing or disbelieving, and it's aimed at how you live this week. Somewhere, someone is telling you right now that the Buddha didn't really require anyone to accept rebirth, that it's a cultural artifact, that the real teaching is mindfulness, ethics, the reduction of suffering in this one life you have. They are half right. The Buddha did not demand belief as a precondition for practice. He did something more interesting. He made a philosophical argument for why the honest skeptic should take rebirth seriously anyway. An argument built not on faith, but on the structure of a wager. And he made it to educated audiences who, 26 centuries ago, already held the materialist position most modern skeptics assume they invented. But here is the harder question, the one that stops most conversations before they start. If the Buddha also taught Anatṭā, that there is no fixed, permanent self, then what exactly is reborn? Not a soul. He rejected that view explicitly in a passage where a monk named Sāti proposed it and was rebuked directly. MN 38. Something continues, but it is not you in the way you think you are you. Tonight, what the earliest texts actually say, why the wheel of life you have seen in art books is not what the Buddha taught, and what this teaching does to how you live now, regardless of whether you are ever certain. Chapter 1. Before we discuss what rebirth means, it is worth clearing a piece of ground that most Western presentations of Buddhism skip entirely. If you have seen the Buddhist teaching on rebirth in an art book, or a museum display, or a documentary, you have probably seen the Wheel of Life, a great disc held in the claws of a fanged demon named Yama, the Lord of Death. At the center, 3 animals biting each other's tails, a pig, a snake, a rooster, the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. Around them, 6 sections showing the realms of existence, gods at the top, then titans, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings at the bottom. Around the whole thing, 12 small scenes showing dependent origination. It is one of the most reproduced images in Buddhist visual culture, and it is not what the Buddha taught. I want to be careful here. I am not saying the Wheel of Life is wrong, or heretical, or something to be discarded. It is a beautiful teaching device developed by later Buddhist tradition, but it is a teaching device, not scripture. And when we are trying to understand what the earliest texts actually say about rebirth, we need to know which pieces come from the Buddha and which come from centuries of later elaboration. The scholarly work here is quite clear. The definitive study is Stephen Teiser's Reinventing the Wheel, published by the University of Washington Press. What Teiser and other scholars have established is this: the image of the Wheel of Life, the painted disc, Yama at the rim, the 6 sections, does not appear in the Buddha's recorded discourses. Its earliest documented source is a Sanskrit monastic code called the Mūlasarvāstivāda Vinaya, composed roughly in the 2nd century of the Common Era, that is somewhere between 6 and 8 centuries after the Buddha's death. The earliest surviving visual we have is a mural at Ajaṇṭā Cave 17 in Western India, dated to the 5th century. That mural, incidentally, has 8 sections, not 6. The wheel, as most people know it today, with its precise iconography, its 6 realms in the arrangement everyone recognizes, was further elaborated in Tibet, many centuries later still. None of this makes it a bad teaching, but it is not what the Buddha said. And this matters, because what the Buddha said is different in a way that changes the picture. The Pali Canon, our earliest surviving record of the Buddha's teaching, describes not 6 but 5 destinations. The term is pankagati, literally, the 5 goings. The passage is at Anguttara Nikaya 9.68, AN 9.68, and it also appears in the Great Shanada Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, MN 12, and in the enumeration list of the Digha Nikaya. 5 destinations: hell beings, animals, hungry ghosts, humans, and gods. Not 6. There are no asuras, no titans, no jealous demigods. In the earlier scheme, the asura, that 6th realm, was added later, and the addition was controversial enough that we have a record of ancient monks arguing about it. In a scholastic work of the Sarvastivāda school called the Mahavibhasa, we find this direct comment. The members of other schools added the asura to make 6 destinations. This should not be done, for the sutras teach only 5. That is an ancient scholar working within the tradition saying, the Buddha taught 5, and some of our colleagues have added a 6th, and they should not have. The 5-realm teaching was the older and more authoritative one. The 6-realm scheme won out in popular tradition, and the wheel we know today is built on the later scheme. So when I say the wheel of life is not what the Buddha taught, I mean this precisely. He taught 5 destinations, not 6. He did not describe a painted wheel. He did not speak of a fanged demon holding the whole cosmos in his claws. Those images belong to a later stratum of Buddhist visual imagination, developed by monks who wanted a teaching tool for lay audiences. That is a perfectly legitimate development. It is not, however, the earliest teaching. Now, what did the earliest teaching say? What is the canonical picture of rebirth in the Buddha's own words? The core material is in a section of the Samyutta Nikaya called the Anattā Samyutta. The word Anattā is difficult to translate cleanly. It means, roughly, of unfindable beginning, the point at which a starting place cannot be located. The whole section is about the beginningless character of wandering, of continuing on, of being carried from life to life by the momentum of ignorance and craving. And the images the Buddha uses in this section are not decorative. They are meant to stop you. Here is one. It is from Samyutta 15.3, S, N 15.3, and it is called the Asu Sutta, the Sutta of Tears. The Buddha is speaking with a group of monks. He asks them a question. Which do you think is greater, monks? The tears you have shed while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, or the water in the 4 great oceans? The monks, familiar with his method, answer as they have been trained. Whatever the Blessed One teaches, that is greater. And he tells them, the tears are greater, not close, greater than the water in all 4 great oceans, because you have wept over the incalculable length of your wandering, for every kind of loss a being can have. You have lost mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and wealth and status and health and every form of what was dear to you. And every time you lost these things, you wept, and the tears accumulate. That is one image. Here is another from Samyutta 15.1, S, N 15.1. The Tinakatha Sutta, the Sutta of grass and sticks. If, monks, a person were to gather up all the grass, sticks, branches and leaves of this earth into a single pile, and were to reduce them to pellets the size of the pit of a juju fruit, and were to lay them out one by one, saying, this was my mother, this was my mother's mother, this was her mother, the pellets would run out, the material of this whole earth would run out. Before your line of mothers did, You are meant to feel something when you hear these images, not intellectual assent, not agreement. A pause. The scale is meant to be uncomfortable. This is the canonical picture of samsara. Not a painted wheel, not a demon with fangs, but a beginningless duration of wandering, sustained by ignorance and craving, in which the tears you have shed exceed the water in all the oceans, and the mothers you have had exceed the material of the earth. Now here is the question that the whole section is building toward, and it is the question this entire video is about. What do you do with that picture? Is it a metaphysical claim, a mythological embellishment, a meditation object, an empirical hypothesis? What is it exactly? Because notice something. The Buddha did not simply assert rebirth and demand agreement. He argued for it. He made philosophical arguments. He used images to move the affections and the imagination. He engaged with skeptics who denied it entirely. And he offered, this is the piece that most Western presentations miss, a pragmatic frame for taking it seriously even under uncertainty. That frame is in the 60th discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, a sutta called Apannaka, MN 60. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, the American monk whose translations are the primary source for the readings in this video, titles his rendering of it, A Safe Bet. That title is a translator's choice, and it is a revealing one, because what the Buddha does in this sutta is something remarkable. He walks into a village called Sala and finds that the residents have never heard of him. They are, in a sense, a religious sample of the ancient world at large. Some are followers of one teacher, some of another. Some are skeptics of the whole business of teachers. And the Buddha, rather than converting them, offers them a method for thinking about religious claims when you cannot verify them empirically. He walks through several such claims, and he does it with the same structure each time. Take the claim that there is no next world. Suppose you accept this claim and act accordingly. Abandon ethical practice. Dismiss the teaching of consequences beyond this life. Now consider what happens. If there really is no next world, you have made the correct call, and you are praised only for the strength of your convictions. Fair enough. But if there is a next world, and you were wrong to dismiss it, then you have not only misjudged the situation, you have also, in this life, behaved in a way that intelligent observers around you criticize. You have made a bad throw twice. The reverse case is the interesting one. Suppose you accept that there is a next world, and you live accordingly. You practice ethics, you refine your intentions, you take the teaching of consequences seriously. If there is a next world, you have set yourself up well for it. But if there is no next world, if the skeptics were right all along, you have still, in this life, lived in a way that intelligent observers respect. You have made a good throw twice. This is a wager argument. And yes, anyone familiar with Western philosophy will hear the echo. Blaise Pascal, in the 17th century, made a structurally similar argument for belief in the Christian God. Thanissaro himself acknowledges the resemblance in his commentary. The Buddha's version, made 2,500 years before Pascal, is more careful. It is not really about belief, and it is not about God. It is about how you conduct yourself under uncertainty. Given that you cannot verify the next world empirically in this life, and given that the ethical implications of the two positions are different, how should you live? I want to be honest about one thing here. The Apannaka Sutta is not entirely composed of wager arguments. Other sections of the same sutta simply assert that rebirth is real, in ways that do not depend on the wager structure at all. There actually is the next world, the Buddha says at one point, flatly, without hedging. Thanissaro notes with characteristic honesty that whether these more assertive passages date from the Buddha himself or were added later, we cannot know. The sutta is layered, but the wager frame is unmistakably present, and it is unmistakably the Buddha's own move. He is offering a way for the honest skeptic to take rebirth seriously without pretending to a certainty no one can have. And here is the point that matters for the rest of this video. The people the Buddha was arguing with were not naive. The ancient world already had its materialists. There is a striking passage in the Samannaphala Sutta, the second discourse of the Digha Nikaya, DN2, where a teacher named Ajita Keśakambalī states a position that sounds startlingly modern. There is no offering, he says, no sacrifice, no fruit or result of good or bad actions. There is no this world, no next world. A human being is composed of the four great elements: earth, water, fire, air, and at death, the earthly returns to earth, the fluid to water, the heat to fire, the wind to air. The person is gone. The end. Read that carefully. That is materialism, 2,500 years old. The Buddha was not addressing an audience of the credulous, being given a metaphysical picture they had no reason to doubt. He was addressing an audience that already contained sophisticated skeptics who denied rebirth on precisely the grounds most modern skeptics still deny it: that the material of the body decomposes, and there is no evidence for anything more. The Buddha was aware of Ajita's position. He engaged with it. He did not primarily engage by trying to prove rebirth. He engaged instead by asking what a life looks like when it is lived under the assumption that Ajita is right, and comparing it to a life lived under the assumption that he is not. That is chapter 1. The canon teaches 5 destinations, not 6. The wheel of life is a later teaching device, not scripture. The Buddha's own picture of samsara is not a painted disc, but a beginningless duration, imaged in tears and grass. He argued for it rather than assuming it, offering the wager to the honest skeptic. And he did so knowing that his ancient audience already contained materialists whose position was almost identical to the modern one. Which brings us to the harder question, because even if you take the wager seriously, even if you accept, for the sake of argument, that there is rebirth, a deeper problem arrives immediately. If the Buddha also taught that there is no fixed self, no soul, no permanent essence to a person, then what exactly is being reborn? Chapter 2. So, what is reborn? The question sounds simple. It is not. Because the Buddha, in the same body of teaching that describes the beginningless wandering of samsara, also taught Anatṭā, non-self. There is no permanent, unchanging essence at the core of a person. No soul in the sense that Western religion has usually meant that word. No fixed identity that persists across change, let alone across death. And this creates an immediate philosophical problem, one that the Buddha's own students raised in his lifetime, and that scholars have been arguing about for 2,500 years. If there is no self, what carries over? What travels from this life to the next? What is it that gets born into a new mother's body, if not the person who died? The Buddha's answer to this question is, in my reading, one of the most philosophically careful moves in the history of religion. He rejected 2 positions equally. He rejected the eternalist position, that some subtle, unchanging thing, a soul, a self, a spirit, migrates from body to body. And he rejected the annihilationist position, that death is the end, full stop, nothing continues. The person simply ceases. Both positions, he said, are wrong. and he insisted on this with unusual force. There is a passage in the Majjhima Nikaya, Discourse 38, MN 38, where this insistence becomes visible in a way that changes how you read everything else. A monk in the Buddha's community, his name was Sāti, and he was, we are told, the son of a fisherman, began teaching other monks that he had understood the Buddha's meaning. What he had understood was this: it is just this consciousness, he said, that runs and wanders on from birth to birth, not another, just this one, the same consciousness, traveling. Word reached the Buddha. He summoned Sāti. He asked him, in front of the community, whether this was in fact what Sāti was teaching. Sāti confirmed that it was, and the Buddha rebuked him, publicly, sharply, and completely. I want to give you the exact structure of the rebuke, because it is the anchor for everything that follows. The Buddha did not say Sāti was oversimplifying, or getting the emphasis wrong, or missing a subtlety. He said Sāti was fundamentally misunderstanding the teaching. Haven't I, in many ways, the Buddha asked, said of dependently co-arisen consciousness, apart from a requisite condition, there is no coming into play of consciousness. In other words, consciousness does not exist as an independent, migrating thing. It arises always in dependence on conditions. When those conditions are present, it appears. When they are not, it does not. And then the Buddha gave a simile that I think is worth pausing over. Just as a fire, he said, is classified by the requisite condition in dependence on which it burns. A fire that burns in dependence on wood is called a wood fire. A fire that burns in dependence on grass is called a grass fire. A fire that burns in dependence on dung is called a dung fire. In the same way, consciousness is classified by the requisite condition in dependence on which it arises. Consciousness that arises in dependence on the I and forms is I consciousness, and so on through each of the senses. This is not a metaphysical claim about a subtle entity that has a nature you can specify. It is the opposite. It is a claim that consciousness has no independent nature, no essence you can point to and say, that is what consciousness is. Consciousness is defined entirely by what gives rise to it. It is a process, not a thing. And this is what Sāti had failed to understand. Sāti had made consciousness into a something. The Buddha, in this passage, refuses that move, even for the sake of explaining rebirth. Now, you can see the problem this creates, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. If consciousness is not a thing that travels, and if there is no soul that carries over, then what continues? What links the being who dies to the being who is reborn? The answer, the tradition developed. And I want to be honest, that this is an answer developed by tradition, not fully spelled out in the earliest suttas, is a philosophically strange one. It uses an image, and the most famous version of that image is from a text called the Milinda Panya, the Questions of King Milinda. The Milinda Panya is what scholars call a para-canonical text. It was composed roughly in the 1st century before the Common Era, some 3 or 4 centuries after the Buddha's death, and it consists of a long dialogue between a Buddhist monk named Nagasena and a Greek king named Milinda. Milinda is a real historical figure. His Greek name was Menanda, one of the successors of Alexander the Great's conquest, who ruled a kingdom in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan in the 2nd century before the Common Era. He was intellectually curious enough to sit down with a Buddhist monk and ask hard questions. The Milinda Panya is a record, or a stylized record, of those conversations. It is not part of the 5 Nikayas, but in the Burmese Buddhist canon, it is included as scripture, and across the Theravada world, it is regarded as an authoritative early exposition, not the Buddha's words, but close. And in that text, King Milinda asks the question we are asking. If there is no soul, what is reborn? What continues from one life to the next? Nagasena's answer uses a lamp. Suppose, O king, he says, that a man were to light a lamp from another lamp. Is it the same flame that burns in the second lamp as in the first? No, says the king. Then is there one flame in the first watch of the night, and another in the second, and another in the third? No, says the king. The light comes from the same lamp all the night through. Just so, says Nagasena, is the continuity of a person maintained. One thing comes into being, another thing passes away, and the rebirth is, as it were, simultaneous with the passing. Thus, and this is the phrase that has echoed through Buddhist philosophy ever since, neither as the same nor as another does a man go on to the last phase of his self-consciousness. Neither the same nor another. Sit with that phrase for a moment, because it is doing something very specific. It is refusing both of the ordinary answers we would like to give. It is not the case that the same person is reborn, and it is not the case that a completely different, unconnected person is reborn. Both would be wrong. What is reborn is something that stands in a certain causal relationship to what died, a relationship of continuity, but not of identity. Like the second lamp, lit from the first, the light is not the same light, but it also did not come from nowhere. Nagasena develops the image in several ways in the text. Milk becomes curds. Curds become butter. Butter becomes ghee. At each stage, the substance changes. And yet no one would say the ghee has nothing to do with the milk. The thread is not identity. The thread is causation. This is the philosophical resolution, as much of one as the tradition offers. What continues from life to life is not a substance, not a soul, not even the same consciousness. What continues is a causal stream, a process shaped by intention and action, by what the tradition calls karma, and by the residual patterns of ignorance and craving that have not yet been extinguished. The technical term for this, in the developed tradition, is santana, a continuum, a stream, and the image the tradition returns to again and again is one of process rather than substance, fire from fire, lamp from lamp, curds from milk. I want to note here, and this is important for intellectual honesty, that there is real scholarly debate about the mechanism. Thanisaro Bhikkhu, whose translations we have been using, has developed a careful position over the course of many essays. In his reading, and I want to be clear, this is his reading, not a settled matter. What carries the continuity is the intentional stream, the accumulated momentum of a lifetime of choices, of habits of attention, of the karma one has generated. No subtle entity is needed to explain the process. The process is the momentum of intention itself. You can find this argument developed most fully in his essay called The Truth of Rebirth, published on dhammatalks.org in 2012. It is Thanisaro's reading. It is philosophically elegant, and it is one reading among several. The commentarial tradition, that is, the layer of interpretation developed by monks in the centuries after the Buddha's death, most influentially by Buddhaghosa in the 5th century of the Common Era, offered a different technical apparatus. Buddhaghosa developed a doctrine of bhavanga, a life continuum, a substrate of consciousness that runs beneath the surface of experience and provides the mechanism for continuity across lives. This is commentarial, not canonical. The Buddha did not use the word bhavanga in this technical sense in the discourses that survive. It is a later theoretical development, and it has been influential in Theravada scholasticism. But it is not the Buddha's own vocabulary, and modern scholars, Bhikkhu Bodhi among them, are generally careful to label it as a commentarial elaboration rather than as the Buddha's own teaching. Bhikkhu Bodhi's own position, if I read him correctly, is a middle way between the extremes. He affirms rebirth as a core teaching. He is cautious about theoretical elaborations of the mechanism. He tends to emphasize what the suttas actually say, that there is a process, that it is real, that it is shaped by intention, and to hold lightly to the further question of exactly how the process works at a metaphysical level. One modern voice deserves brief acknowledgement. Stephen Batchelor's Buddhism Without Beliefs, published in 1997, made the case for what he called an agnostic Buddhism, a practice that neither affirms nor denies rebirth. Batchelor is a serious writer, but note what he himself concedes in the same book. The historical Buddha almost certainly taught rebirth. Batchelor does not dispute this. His argument is that the Buddha's teaching was shaped by the assumptions of his time and that modern practitioners are free to reinterpret. That is a coherent modern reframing, offered honestly as such. It is not a discovery of what the Buddha secretly meant. The Buddha did not leave the question open. Batchelor's point is that we, 26 centuries later, might. There is one more thing I want to say in this chapter, and it is the thing that most guards against oversimplification. There is a discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 136, called the Mahakamma Vibhanga, the Great Analysis of Kamma, MN 136. It is a difficult sutta, and it is a corrective, because the natural instinct, when one first hears the teaching of rebirth linked to Kamma, is to suppose the mechanism is simple. Good deeds lead to good rebirths. Bad deeds lead to bad rebirths. A moral vending machine. The Buddha, in MN 136, explicitly warns against this reading. He describes 4 cases. The first, a person who lives a life of harmful action and upon death appears in a bad destination. Predictable. The second, a person who lives a life of good action and upon death appears in a good destination. Also predictable. But the third and fourth cases are the ones that stop you. The third, a person who lives a life of harmful action and yet, upon death, appears in a good destination. The fourth, a person who lives a life of good action and yet, upon death, appears in a bad destination. How can this be? The Buddha explains. The mechanism is complex. Kamma accumulates over the whole of one's lifetimes. The moment of death, the state of mind at the moment of passing, has enormous weight. The strength of intention behind a given action matters. Earlier Kamma, still unripened, can ripen at any moment. The picture the sutta gives is not a vending machine at all. It is a system with feedback loops and delays and cross-currents, in which no single action determines the outcome, and no simple accounting can be made. I raise MN 136 here for a reason. Because if you are going to take rebirth seriously as a teaching, you have to take it seriously in the way the Buddha himself framed it, not in the simplified form that popular exposition often offers. The teaching, in the Buddha's own words, is more careful than the caricature. And this is what it looks like to think seriously about it, which brings us, finally, to the question that matters most for how you actually live. If the mechanism is this complex, if the wager is this careful, if what continues is a stream rather than a soul, and if the outcomes are shaped by intention rather than by a simple accounting of deeds, what does the teaching offer you right now before any of it is settled? Chapter 3. Here is what I want to argue in this final section. Whatever you conclude about rebirth as a metaphysical matter, whether you take Tanisaro's position, or Bodhi's, or Bachelor's, or you set the question aside entirely, the teaching itself changes something in how you live now, not because it resolves uncertainty, because it gives you a way to hold uncertainty that most other frameworks do not. I want to start where the tradition itself starts, when it turns from theory to practice, not with the mechanism of rebirth, not with the philosophical puzzle, with a set of 5 sentences that a lay disciple, on the Buddha's instruction, is meant to contemplate every day. The text is at Ajaṇṭā Nikaya 5.57, AN 5.57, and it is called the Upajjhatthana Sutta. The subjects for contemplation. The Buddha tells his audience, there are 5 facts that a woman or a man, whether ordained or lay, should reflect on often. Let me give them to you. The first, I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. The second, I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. The third, I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. The fourth, I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. The fifth, and this is the one I want to sit with, I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. Read those slowly. The first 4 are what the tradition calls the direct contemplations. They are not morbid, though they can sound so on first hearing. They are contemplations of the actual conditions of the human body and the human life. You are aging. You will get sick. You will die. Everything you love, every person, every possession, every state of body and mind will eventually be separated from you. The Buddha is not being cruel. He is describing the conditions we live under, and he is saying, you cannot practice seriously if you refuse to look at these conditions honestly. But the 5th fact does something different. It shifts the frame. The first 4 are about what is happening to you. The 5th is about what is coming from you. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions. Whatever you do, right now, this hour, this day, is what you are inheriting. Not later. Not in a next life you may or may not believe in. Now. The actions you perform accumulate. They shape your habits. They shape the person you become. They shape, in the tradition's picture, the stream that continues after death. But that is the additional claim. Even if you set the additional claim aside, the immediate claim remains. The person who acts with generosity is becoming a generous person. The person who acts with cruelty is becoming a cruel person. Whatever you do, to that will you fall heir, starting immediately. Consider what this means in a single ordinary moment. The impatient word you speak to someone you love at the end of a long day is not just an incident. It is a small deposit into the person you are becoming. One who speaks that way, in that state, to that person. The patient breath you take instead, the one that lets you say something different, is also a deposit. Neither is dramatic. Neither is remembered by tomorrow morning. But the tradition is precise on this point. The stream is composed of exactly these small deposits, day after day, decade after decade. The person standing at the end of a life is not a separate character introduced at the end of the story. That person is the accumulated result of every deposit made along the way. This is the rebirth teaching made practical, and it is the answer to the question I raised at the end of the last chapter. What does rebirth offer you before any of it is settled? It offers this: the recognition that your actions are already, in this life, becoming who you are, and that this is true whether or not you accept the further claim about what continues after death. Now, I want to acknowledge here a stronger claim, which some in the tradition make, and which I think is worth taking seriously, even if you do not accept it. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, whose work has anchored much of this video, argues, and I want to label this as his interpretive position, that rebirth is not an optional add-on to the Dhamma, but is structurally necessary to it. In his reading, if you remove rebirth from the picture, the entire framework of the teaching changes shape. The goal is no longer the cessation of the whole cycle of becoming, extending across incalculable lifetimes. The goal reduces to improving the quality of one lifetime. Those are, in his view, radically different projects. One is a path oriented toward liberation from the entire process of being reborn. The other is a form of therapy for people who happen to be alive right now. I am not asking you to accept that argument. I am asking you to notice that it is a coherent one. The Buddhist teaching, in its original framing, was aimed at a very large problem. The problem of continued becoming across an unimaginable duration. If you shrink the frame to a single lifetime, you are working with a different teaching. It may still be a valuable teaching, but it is a different one. Thanissaro's point is that this shrinkage is not a neutral move. It changes what the practice is aiming at. You can see the difference in a practical way. A version of Buddhism concerned with a single lifetime naturally focuses on managing stress, reducing anxiety, improving relationships, aging with equanimity. These are worthy goals. Meditation apps sell them successfully. But a version of Buddhism concerned with the entire process of becoming, extending backward into an unfindable past and forward into an incalculable future, is aimed at something much more radical. It is aimed at the ending of the process itself, not a better life, an end to the whole cycle of lives. That is a different order of ambition, and it produces a different kind of practice. Both may be genuine responses to the teaching, but they are not the same response. There is a related teaching from earlier in the same Anguttara collection that I want to close this chapter with, because it may be the most practical instruction the Buddha ever gave on death, and it is not what most people expect. The passage is at Anguttara Nikaya 6.19, A, N 6.19, and it is called the Maranasati Sutta, the Sutta of mindfulness of death. The Buddha is with a group of monks, and he asks each of them how they contemplate death. One says, "I contemplate that I could die tonight, and that would be enough time to practice." The Buddha says, "This is not heedful enough." Another says, "I contemplate that I could die within a single day, and that would be enough time to practice. Not heedful enough." Another says, "Within the time of a single meal." Not heedful enough. Another, "Within the time it takes to chew and swallow 4 or 5 morsels of food." Still not heedful enough. Then, finally, one monk says something that the Buddha accepts. He says, "I contemplate that I could die within the time it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out. And I use even that interval to attend to the Buddha's teaching." The Buddha says, "This is heedful. This is mindfulness of death, developed and pursued. This is what gains a footing in the deathless. Sit with that for a moment." The Buddha is not asking you to think about death in the abstract. He is not asking you to visualize your funeral. He is asking you to notice this breath you are taking right now, the one entering your body. You do not know whether you will be alive to take the next one. That is the honest situation. And the practice is not to be terrified by it. The practice is to let that recognition sharpen the quality of attention you are bringing to whatever you are doing. Right now, in this breath, the rebirth teaching, understood this way, does not make death distant. It makes it immediate. You are one breath from whatever the stream of your intentions carries forward, and the practice is not later. It is now. I want to speak directly here, to the audience most likely watching this video. If you are in your 50s or 60s or 70s, if the time you have remaining is closer to the front of your mind than it was 10 or 20 years ago, this teaching is not a philosophical curiosity. It is an operating manual. You are not being asked to speculate about distant future lives. You are being asked to consider what this teaching does to how you live this week, this year, however much time remains. The 5 contemplations of Ajaṇṭā 5.57 are not morbid. They are clarifying. You are subject to aging. You are subject to illness. You are subject to death. You will be separated from all that is dear to you. And whatever you do, in whatever time you have, to that you fall heir, immediately, and beyond immediately if the teaching is true. This is a serious teaching for a serious moment in a life. It does not require certainty about rebirth. It does not require you to hold any particular position on what continues after death. It requires only the willingness to look at the actual conditions you live under without flinching, and to act in this breath and the next one and the one after, as if what you do matters, because it does. Close. I want to end where the tradition itself ends, not with a proof, not with a philosophical resolution, with a death. The story is told at some length in the 16th discourse of the Dāgha Nikāya, a sutta called the Mahaparinibbāna, DN 16, the Great Discourse on the Complete Passing. It is unusual for a canonical text in its narrative fullness. Most suttas record a single teaching in a single place. This one records the last months of the Buddha's life, his travels, his conversations with old students, a meal he ate that made him sick, the town he chose for his death, and the final words he spoke before he passed. He was in his 81st year. He was walking north on a road that would lead him eventually to a small town called Kusinara. Kusinara was not a particularly important place. Some of his students questioned the choice, and he explained his reasons, but even his explanation suggested he had chosen it more for its meaning than its prominence. He arrived tired. His attendant, a monk named Anatṭā, who had been with him for 25 years, prepared a resting place between 2 great sāla trees in a grove on the outskirts of the town. And the Buddha lay down there, on his right side, in what the tradition would later call the lion's posture. He was ready. The scene that unfolds is one of the most detailed we have in the canon. Monks gather. Villagers come to pay respects. The sutta records something remarkable at this point. The twin sāla trees, though it was not their season, bloomed. They rained blossoms down on the Buddha's body. Celestial music was heard, the text says. Powers of the natural and unseen worlds seemed to be marking the moment. And the Buddha, noticing this, turned to his attendant and said something that I think is easy to miss, but should not be. He said, "This is not how the Tathagata is truly honored. The true honor is when a disciple, having heard the teaching, practices it in accordance with the Dhamma. That is the offering the Tathagata receives, not the falling flowers." He answers questions. He gives final instructions on how the community should organize itself after his death, and, importantly, he refuses to appoint a successor. The Dhamma itself, he says, will be their teacher. He addresses the last of the students who arrive. He asks 3 times whether any of them still have questions about the teaching. 3 times, no one speaks. And then, in the 3rd watch of the night, as dawn was approaching, he spoke his final words. The translation I want to use here is the one on accesstoinsite.org, prepared by Sister Vajira and Francis' story. It is not Thanisaro's. As far as I have found, Thanisaro has not produced a full translation of DN16, and the attribution matters. The Pali phrase is short. 4 words. Vayadhamma Sankara Apamadena Sampadetha. Sister Vajira and Francis' story render it. All compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. Read those 2 sentences again. All compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. That is what he left them. That is the summary of the teaching, in the moment when a teacher has no more time to say anything else. He did not ask them to believe in rebirth. He did not ask them to accept a metaphysical position on what continues after death. He did not tell them the answer to the philosophical puzzle we have spent this video circling. He told them 2 things. First, everything you can construct, everything that has been put together, including this body I am about to leave, is subject to vanishing. Look at that clearly. Do not deny it. Second, given that, do not be careless. Strive with earnestness in whatever time you have. The Buddha had practiced, in his own understanding, for what he took to be an incalculable duration. He had, in the tradition's telling, remembered previous lives. He believed this was not a hedged position for him, that the stream continues. He knew what he took the stakes to be, and in his final breath, he did not lecture his students on metaphysics. He gave them the practice, which brings us back to where we started, in the section called the Samyutta on the beginningless, because the last thing I want to leave you with is from the same collection we opened with, the great exhortation at Samyutta 15.13. N 15.13, the one that closes the whole section on wandering. The Buddha, having led his students through image after image of the incalculable duration of samsara, the tears greater than the oceans, the mothers uncountable in the material of the earth, turns to them and delivers what I think is the true summary of the rebirth teaching as an instruction. Long have you thus experienced stress. Long have you thus experienced pain. Long have you thus experienced loss. Enough. This is the word he uses, alam, which carries in Pali the sense of sufficient, adequate, let this suffice, enough to become disenchanted with all fabrications, enough to become dispassionate, enough to be released, enough. That is the point of the whole picture. Not to convince you of the number of lifetimes you have had, or the number ahead of you. The picture is meant to produce a specific response in you, in this life, in this hour. The response is enough. The response is disenchantment with the whole process of construction, and grasping and inheriting the results of previous grasping. Not despair, not indifference. A settled recognition that the pattern has run long enough, and that what you do now can begin to end it, or at minimum, can begin to change what you are becoming inside it. This is the word the Buddha uses when he has led his audience to the edge of the picture and wants them to turn around and see what the picture is for. Not the tears themselves, not the counting of mothers, not the scale, the turning, the moment when you look at what you have been doing and what has been done to you and say, this has been enough. I do not need another cycle of this to understand what it is. I can begin to release my grip on the whole process, starting now, with the practice that is available in this life. And so, we come back one more time to where the Buddha met his skeptics in the village of Sala and offered them the wager MN 60. Because everything we have covered in this video comes to rest here. You are not being asked to believe. You are being offered a position. The position is this, that ethical living under uncertainty is the rational choice, that the stream of your intentions carries something forward, whether or not you understand the mechanism, whether or not you can specify what carries forward means at a metaphysical level, that the person you are becoming, moment by moment, is already inheriting the actions you are performing right now, not after this life, now. And that, whatever else may or may not be true, this immediate inheritance is real, and it is the thing the practice is aiming at. The Buddha did not ask you for certainty. He did not offer you certainty. He offered you a way to live under conditions where certainty is not available to any of us, under the honest recognition that we do not know what happens after death, but we do know that we are constructing right now the person who will meet it. The path is here. It has always been here. It runs in the tradition's picture, across an incalculable duration behind you and an incalculable duration ahead. But you do not have to enter it at any of those points. You can only enter it at one point. This one, this breath, the one you are taking right now as you listen to these words, the only one you have. Strive with earnestness. That is the whole of it.